Hello, and welcome to the channel. I'm glad you're here, and I truly appreciate you listening today. If you enjoy the stories, please consider liking this video and subscribing for more. Viewer discretion is advised. Now, let's settle in and enjoy today's stories. I had no business being out there. The woods were thick and disorienting, and the sky was already bruising into twilight. But I couldn't resist the lure of the abandoned places I kept hearing about. They called them Cold War relics, old bunkers scattered throughout the forest, forgotten by time. No one really knew where they were, just vague rumors passed around in the local hiking circles. I had been wandering for hours, my legs heavy and my throat dry, the excitement that had pushed me out here slowly fading into unease. The trees loomed closer the deeper I went, and every sound seemed too loud in the unnatural quiet of the forest. That's when I found it. At first, I thought it was just another rock formation, or maybe an old foundation from a long-gone building. But as I pushed through the underbrush, I saw it, a rusted metal door, half buried in the earth, its edges jagged and flaking with decay. The bunker. My heart leapt. I was tired, sure, but the adrenaline was back. I pulled at the door, the metal groaning as it resisted. Finally, with a sharp creak, it gave way, swinging open to reveal a staircase descending into the darkness. A cold gust of air hit me, the smell of damp and rust curling into my nose. I hesitated at the top of the stairs, peering down. There was no light, no sound, nothing, just the silent invitation to step inside. This was what I came for, right? To explore the hidden places, the forgotten corners of history. So I took a breath and went down. The door clanged shut behind me, sealing me inside. I cursed under my breath. The door had slammed shut faster than I expected. No problem. It wasn't like I was trapped, just a little startled. I turned on my flashlight and swept it across the narrow corridor in front of me. The walls were concrete, the floor uneven, with dirt and debris scattered everywhere. The bunker had been untouched for years, maybe decades. I walked slowly, my footsteps echoing in the cramped space. The light from my flashlight flickered, and I shook it, trying to steady the beam. The air was cold, far colder than it should have been, and the deeper I went, the more oppressive it felt. The weight of the earth above pressed down, making the space feel smaller and tighter with every step. The corridor opened into a larger room, filled with old, rusting equipment. Desks, overturned chairs and filing cabinets stood frozen in time, as if whoever had been here had left in a hurry. There were papers scattered on the floor, yellowed with age. I picked one up. It was written in Russian. I couldn't read it, but I recognized enough to know this place had been active during the Cold War. Suddenly, there was a noise behind me, a sharp, metallic scrape. I spun around, my heart leaping into my throat, but there was nothing. Just the same corridor, stretching into the darkness. "Calm down," I whispered to myself. "You're alone down here." But the quiet that followed was too still, too heavy, as if the bunker itself was listening. I pushed deeper into the bunker, trying to shake off the growing unease gnawing at the back of my mind. The place was a maze of corridors and rooms, each one more cluttered and decayed than the last. I found a stairwell leading down, and without thinking, I descended, the walls closing in tighter around me. That's when I heard it, a faint shuffling, like footsteps dragging across the floor. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The sound was distant, but unmistakable. Someone else was down here. I turned off my flashlight, the darkness immediately swallowing me. I pressed myself against the wall, straining to listen. The footsteps grew louder, coming from somewhere below. They weren't hurried, but deliberate, like whoever was making them knew I was here and was coming for me. I clenched my teeth, trying to steady my breathing. I didn't believe in ghosts or anything supernatural, but that didn't mean I was alone down here. Maybe some vagrants had found the bunker first, or worse, someone who didn't want to be found. The footsteps stopped. I waited, counting the seconds in my head. My palms were slick with sweat, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. But there was nothing, just the suffocating silence pressing down from all sides. Then, from the corridor ahead, came a low, guttural sound. A voice, barely human, speaking words I couldn't understand. I ran. My feet pounded against the concrete floor as I sprinted back the way I'd come. The walls blurred past me, and I didn't dare look behind. The voice had stopped, but I could hear something else now. Something fast, moving through the dark, getting closer. I tore through the corridors, my flashlight swinging wildly in my hand. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like lead, but I kept running, the primal instinct to survive kicking in, overriding everything else. I turned a corner and slammed into a metal door. It rattled in its frame but held, locked. My flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into absolute blackness. I fumbled with it, smacking the side, but it refused to come back on. The sound behind me grew louder. Footsteps, scraping, faster now, almost frantic. Desperation clawed at me, and I threw myself against the door, pounding on it, trying to force it open, but it wouldn't budge. Then I heard it, a rasping breath just behind me. Too close, much too close. I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. Something was there, right behind me, and I could feel its presence like a weight pressing against my back. I turned slowly, my heart slamming in my chest, and for a brief, terrifying moment, I saw it. A figure, tall and twisted, its eyes reflecting the faintest glimmer of light from somewhere deep within the bunker. It wasn't human. I bolted down another corridor, my mind blank with terror. I could hear it following, its footsteps uneven, but fast, too fast. The walls seemed to close in tighter with every turn, the air thick and suffocating. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I just had to keep running. I stumbled into a large room, gasping for breath. It was different from the others, cleaner, more intact. In the center was a control panel, its dials and buttons long dead, but something about the room felt wrong. There were no exits here, no way out. I was trapped. The footsteps stopped just outside the door, and I backed away, my eyes locked on the entrance. I knew it was there, waiting, toying with me, drawing out the fear. My heart hammered against my ribs, my body shaking with adrenaline. The silence was deafening. Then, slowly, the door creaked open. I held my breath, my back pressed against the far wall, nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The figure stepped into the room, its movements jerky and unnatural. It was tall, impossibly tall, with limbs that seemed too long, its face obscured by shadows. But its eyes glowed faintly in the dark, locking onto mine. For a moment, we stood frozen, the distance between us shrinking as it took a step forward. My chest tightened, fear closing around me like a vice. I couldn't move. It stepped closer, and I could hear its breathing now, a wet, rasping sound, like something half alive. Its hand, long, skeletal, reached out, the air around it warping with a chill that sank into my bones. I did the only thing I could think of. I ran. I crashed through the door, adrenaline propelling me forward. My legs burned, and my lungs screamed for air, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The thing was right behind me, its footsteps pounding the floor, its breath hot on the back of my neck. I flew down the corridors, turning blindly, hoping to find the exit. But the bunker was a maze, twisting in on itself, every hallway looking the same. The walls seemed to stretch and warp, the lights flickering, as if the bunker itself was alive, trying to keep me trapped. Then I saw it, the faint glimmer of daylight, seeping in through the crack of the metal door at the top of the stairs. The way out. I sprinted toward it, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. I could hear the thing gaining on me, its footsteps erratic, but too close, too fast. I reached the stairs and scrambled up, grabbing for the door. It was stuck. I yanked on it, my hands slick with sweat, the fear choking me. Behind me, I could hear it coming, feel the cold that radiated from it, the thing that wasn't human. My breath came in ragged gasps, my vision blurring with panic. And then, with a final desperate shove, the door flew open. I tumbled out into the open air, the cool evening breeze hitting my face. I slammed the door behind me, the metallic thud echoing in the silence. For a moment, everything was still. I lay there, gasping for breath, the adrenaline slowly fading. The door remained closed, the forest around me peaceful and quiet, as if nothing had happened. But I knew better. Whatever was down there, it hadn't finished with me. Not yet. And someday, it would find its way out. Urban exploration had become more than a hobby for me. It was an obsession, crawling through abandoned buildings, exploring forgotten tunnels, mapping out the unseen parts of the city. There was a strange thrill in discovering places no one knew about. Most people were content with what they could see, but I wanted more. I craved the hidden, the lost, the places buried beneath the world. Tonight, I was out with a couple of friends, Tom and Sarah. We had heard rumors about an old subway station that had been sealed off decades ago, supposedly connecting to a series of tunnels that went far deeper than anyone expected. Of course, no one really believed those stories, but the chance to explore somewhere untouched was too tempting to pass up. The entrance was easy enough to find, a loose grate in a forgotten corner of the city. Tom had pried it open with a crowbar, and one by one, we slid inside. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and dust, and our flashlights barely pierced the darkness ahead. "This place is ancient," Sarah whispered, her voice echoing slightly off the damp walls. "Perfect, right?" Tom grinned, stepping forward into the tunnel. We followed the old subway tracks for what felt like an hour, deeper into the bowels of the city. The walls were lined with graffiti, but the further we went, the older the markings became. Strange symbols started to appear, etched into the stone, their shapes foreign and unsettling. We didn't talk much after that, a growing sense of unease settling over us. Then we found the hole. It wasn't part of the station. It looked like someone, or something, had dug through the floor long after the place had been abandoned. A gaping wound in the concrete, leading straight down into the blackness below. "Do we check it out?" Tom asked, already edging toward it. "I don't know." Sarah hesitated, but I could see the curiosity in her eyes. It was the same curiosity that drove me, that made me push deeper into places others would avoid. "We've come this far," I said. "Might as well see what's down there." Tom threw a length of rope into the hole, securing it to a rusted beam. One by one, we descended into the unknown, the light from our flashlights flickering against the jagged walls of the tunnel as we went deeper. When we finally touched the ground, it was quiet. Too quiet. I couldn't hear the city above us anymore, just the soft shuffle of our footsteps and the drip of water somewhere in the distance. The walls were smooth here, as if they had been carved deliberately. That's when we saw it. The tunnel opened into a massive cavern, and at its center, an underground city stretched out before us. Buildings were carved from the stone, ancient and foreboding, with narrow streets winding between them. Flickering lights glowed in the windows, but there were no signs of life. Not yet. "What is this place?" Sarah asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know," I said, but I could feel the weight of something ancient pressing down on us. This city had been hidden for centuries, maybe longer, and it wasn't meant to be found. We stood there for a long time, staring at the sprawling underground city, unsure of what to do next. The rational part of me screamed that we should leave, climb back up the rope, and forget we ever saw this place. But something deeper, curiosity maybe, or something darker, pulled me forward. "I think we should explore," I said. Tom nodded, though his usual enthusiasm was gone. Even Sarah, usually the most cautious of us, seemed strangely drawn to the city. We descended into the narrow streets, our footsteps eerily silent on the smooth stone paths. The buildings around us were tall, looming like sentinels, their surfaces carved with symbols and faces that seemed to watch us as we passed. At first, it seemed abandoned. The windows were dark, and there was no movement in the streets. But then, I noticed something. Small, barely there, but enough to send a chill down my spine. A shadow, slipping between two buildings, too quick to be human. I stopped, my heart pounding in my chest. But when I looked again, it was gone. "Did you see that?" I whispered. Tom shook his head, but Sarah nodded. "Yeah, there's something here." We pressed on, our nerves fraying with each step. The deeper we went, the more unsettling the city became. The streets twisted in impossible ways, leading us into narrow alleys and dead ends that hadn't been there a moment before. And the shadows, those flickering, darting shapes, were everywhere now, just at the edges of our vision. Then we found the first sign of life. We turned a corner and stumbled upon a group of figures, huddled in the center of a large open square. They wore tattered robes, their faces obscured by the hoods, and they moved in slow, jerking motions, as though performing some kind of ritual. "What the hell is this?" Tom muttered. "Stay back," I said, pulling him behind a crumbling wall. We watched in silence, as the figures swayed and chanted in a language none of us understood. In the center of their circle was a stone altar, and on it a figure lay bound, struggling weakly against the ropes that held them. "They're gonna kill that person," Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. I wanted to do something, rush in, stop them, but I couldn't move. There was a wrongness in the air, something that pressed down on us, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. Then the chanting stopped. One of the figures stepped forward, raising a knife high above their head. The blade gleamed in the flickering light, and before any of us could react, they brought it down in a swift, brutal motion. The scream that followed wasn't human. We ran. I don't know if the figures saw us, or if they even cared, but we didn't stick around to find out. We bolted down the nearest alley, turning blindly at every corner, trying to put as much distance between us and that awful scene as possible. But the city wasn't going to let us leave. No matter which way we turned, the streets twisted back on themselves, leading us deeper into the maze. The buildings seemed to shift when we weren't looking, their shapes warping into grotesque, unnatural forms. The shadows followed us, closer now, almost tangible. "We have to go back," Sarah panted, her eyes wild with fear. "We have to find the rope. Get out of here." "We're lost," Tom said, his voice hollow. "We're never getting out." "Shut up," I snapped, trying to keep control, though fear gnawed at me too. We just need to retrace our steps. But I knew he was right. The city wasn't just some abandoned relic. It was alive, shifting, watching, trapping us inside. Then we heard the footsteps. They were slow at first, but they grew louder, faster, like something was coming after us. We didn't wait to find out what. We ran again, our breath coming in ragged gasps, the air thick with something foul. We turned a corner, and suddenly the buildings opened into a large circular chamber. At the center was a pit, and around it, more of the robed figures stood, their heads bowed. The pit seemed bottomless, blacker than anything I had ever seen. From it came a sound, a low, pulsing hum, like a heartbeat, reverberating through the stone. "What is this place?" Sarah breathed. "I think it's where they come from," I said. I didn't know how I knew, but it was the truth. The pit was the source of it all, the city, the creatures, the rituals. Everything started here, and we had been drawn into it. We backed away from the chamber, but it was too late. The figures turned toward us, their faces hidden in the shadows of their hoods. I could feel their eyes on us, and beneath those hoods, something shifted, something not quite human. The chanting began again, low and rhythmic, and the ground beneath us seemed to vibrate with each syllable. The air grew colder, and I could feel a pressure building, like the city itself was waking up. "We have to stop them," I said, though I had no idea how. Tom was already moving, picking up a piece of broken stone from the ground. He hurled it at the nearest figure, but it didn't even flinch. The chanting continued, louder now, the sound filling my head, drowning out everything else. Then the pit began to glow. A sickly green light emanated from its depths, and from that light, shapes began to rise. Twisted, deformed figures, their bodies contorted in ways that shouldn't have been possible. They crawled out of the pit, one by one, dragging themselves toward the chanting figures, and toward us. "Run!" I yelled, grabbing Sarah's arm. We bolted again, but there was nowhere to go. The city had closed in around us, the streets narrowing, the walls pressing in. We were trapped. The creatures were getting closer now, their movements slow but relentless. I could feel the ground shaking beneath my feet, the pulse of the city growing stronger. It wanted us. It had claimed us the moment we stepped into it, and now it was pulling us deeper. We reached a dead end, a narrow alleyway blocked by a massive stone wall. Tom pounded on it with his fists, but it was solid, immovable. "We're trapped," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "We're never getting out." I turned, my heart hammering in my chest. The creatures were almost upon us, their twisted forms moving with a terrifying purpose. The robed figures followed behind, their chanting louder now, filling the air with a heavy, oppressive force. And then, as the creatures closed in, I realized the truth. There was no way out. The city wasn't just a place. It was a living thing, ancient and malevolent, and it had been waiting for us, waiting for anyone foolish enough to stumble into its depths. I turned to face the creatures, my breath shallow. This was the end. We had been lured here, trapped in this nightmare beneath the earth, and now there was no escape. The last thing I saw before the darkness took me was the pit, glowing brighter than ever, as the creatures reached out with cold, twisted hands. And then, nothing. If you've made it this far, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed what you've heard and want to hear more, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It really helps the channel grow, and I truly appreciate your support.